Thanks very much, Verity. I asked if anybody would like to begin by asking some questions based on what little or more that you've read of my work. I'll be happy to fill in with sort of some extensive replies, but I think it may be better because I don't know you, or I know very few of you anyway. If one of you or some of you led off with some comments or discussions, I know you've read a little bit of my stuff. That'll give me some guidance in where I would like to go. But I have to say something which is I just found out now that I taught in the town. What's your name? Tunde, where Tunde came from, Ilorin, Nigeria. I taught in a high school in there for a couple of half a year. Most of my teaching was in the far north, but this is a beautiful town just on the edge of the northern part of Nigeria. So I feel like I'm among friends. So who would like to comment about something you've read or seen or whatever? Does anybody want to begin? Okay, good.
This is interesting because I didn't even know that he's partly a Nigerian, because his daughter was born in Nigeria, so she's a Nigerian. So I have a Nigerian sister. But I was actually looking at your bio and tried to read some of your work, and I didn't think I would be able to converse with him because I stared at my computer and it was like my brain, I was going to run insane. That's because, you know, the work is so, all the vocabulary and everything, and I couldn't figure it out, you know. But I said, okay, today I will ask you, that there are certain things that I found that it was interesting, and that's about altruistic and ethical motives that are common in most populations. So I just wanted to start on that so that for me and possibly many others will understand what you mean by altruistic and ethical motives in communities.
Sam, do you want me to write those?
No, well, you can as well, but I'll have to.
Why don't we do that so that they're... Altruism and ethical motives.
Altruistic and ethical motives. So lots of knowledge there. I couldn't just put it all in my head. In communities.
I have a lot of questions of my own, but I'll wait on those because I got an email from Aya Mbaya, who's a graduate of CIE and who's now working in Sierra Leone, and we sent out a couple of papers that you and Gintis wrote, Sam, and he found these fascinating and asked me to ask you, what are the implications of these findings and affirmations for developing countries whose economies are largely driven by either the IMF or the World Bank, two institutions that are the hallmarks of capitalism, both of which are heavily funded or managed by the US?
I think it should be altruistic behaviors. It has to do with behaviors.
IMF and
World Bank.
So can we just throw out questions right now while we're brainstorming?
Yeah, all the better. The more questions at first, the less I'll bore you with things you don't care about.
I was interested in if you have sort of an alternative schooling model in mind, or a different way of doing things than what's being done here.
Can you tell me your name?
Rebecca?
I also have questions. My name's Mindy, along the same lines as the earlier ones. So as teachers and policymakers from many different countries, what suggestions or guidance can you give us about bringing improvements to education systems and policy practice? And also, kind of like Aya asked, can you elaborate on the correspondence principle that you talk about in the articles, and how you think that principle plays out in other cultural contexts?
if I could follow up on Aya's question. I remember when I was in graduate school, looking at your dissertation, where you did the linear programming model of higher education in Nigeria. Still right. Interesting. Anyway, the follow-up would be, to what extent are there periods in the evolution of the economies and society of developing countries when your findings are not accurate or don't work? That is, education may in fact produce significant social mobility and changing in the structure of society. I mean, is that a model that applies only to the developing country or to the developed country, or are there periods when it does not apply to developing countries, and then do they perhaps move into a stage where it begins to apply? Is there some sort of a maturation sequence for economy and society?
I have a question about the space of schools. If schools, as is claimed in the article, if schools are contested sites of socialization, designed, and this is up for debate, but designed to prepare students to function within a capitalist labor force, is there a point in schools trying to function differently within a capitalist economy? Because won't students just be further excluded from the formal labor force or the demands of the workforce? So then what is the role of changing the schooling space? Could we take the next 5 hours to discuss this?
Well, shall I have a go at these? All right. Thanks for your questions, and thanks for the interest that you've shown in my work. I think I'd like to give a little background, because a good number of the questions seem to group around similar themes, which I'll be able to answer better if I give a little the background. Perhaps the best place to start is I myself attended school in India, in a very large school in Delhi. There were no buildings, just as army surplus tents. And my two sisters and I were the only non-Indian kids in the school. There were 2,000 kids. There were more people in the school than in the town I came from. So I was, of course, my first day at school, I was nervous, like all kids are the first day of school. And I fit in very quickly, had a lot of friends, and I noticed immediately that I was extremely average. I was average in sports, and I was average in schoolwork. I was actually a little behind things in schoolwork because, needless to say, I'd gone to a four-room school, and not a big urban school with actually pretty good teachers, which I didn't have at home. But I was certainly not outstanding in any respect. And I remember one day at age 11 asking my mom, how come all these kids' parents are so poor? And then I told my mom all the things I couldn't do any better than the kids in my school. I mean, I couldn't run faster, I couldn't compute sums faster, couldn't do anything better than them, really. And I posed her this question, and actually, if you think of it, it's kind of a pretty good question. Because if you live and spend a lot of time playing, running, competing for popularity, for grades, anything, with kids from another culture, and you find yourself kind of in the middle, but you come from a country which has something like 20 times the income per capita of the country that you're living in, it does pose a very big question. Now, my mother, who was a former social worker, of course, never lost an opportunity to try to give me a lesson. But I think I had stumped her on that one, and I have to say I'm pretty stumped myself. I went on to study economics in part because I didn't have an answer to that question. And that's why I taught in my degree in Nigeria and also in Lawrence. Because I was interested in, and that's why I finally became a teacher as opposed to some other kind of person. I don't know what I might have been, actually. But there's another episode that was very important in my life, and that was, I was studying and doing mathematical economics, and if you'd read my dissertation, you really would have got a headache, because there's almost no English words in there, there's just Greek symbols, you know. And I was, you know, carrying on in that direction. I'd been on the faculty for 3 years, and I got a request from Martin Luther King to produce some background papers for the Poor People's March. And he and others at the SCLC asked a whole bunch of questions. And just like the question that I'd asked my mom, how come they're so poor if I can't run faster than them, I couldn't answer Dr. King's questions. And I was a PhD in economics on the Harvard faculty, and these are economics questions, and I didn't have a clue how to answer them. I mean, I sure found out. I mean, we assembled a very good group, an outstanding group of young economists, and we provided King some answers. And as you probably know, he was killed shortly thereafter. After that, I worked for a group which was pretentiously called Robert Kennedy's Brain Trust, Economic Brain Trust. And an episode there really set my course. We were asked to write certain, you know, advice to the senator. He was running for president. And we met with him, and I had written something about education. And I said, you ought to advocate equality of opportunity in education in the most strongest possible terms, but never, ever claim that this is going to eradicate poverty or racism in America. It should be argued in its own right. And racial differences and differences in income, differences in wealth and ownership have their origins elsewhere, in the economy, not in the educational system. The educational system essentially covers them up. It doesn't cause them. And I presented this. His younger brother was there too, Ted. And I hadn't even finished when one of the very distinguished economists in the group attacked me in the most virulent way. He said, everybody else in this room is trying to build America up, Sam, and you're trying to tear it down. And I was just floored. I was the youngest person there. And I was sort of shocked because I respected this person a lot. And there was a break. And Bobby came over and he said, listen, I want you to come work for me. So I realized that Kennedy had understood what I was saying, even if some of the other economists felt that it was unpatriotic to say that don't think that education can solve the problem of inequality because its origins may lie elsewhere. I'll come back to that because, as you can see, I didn't write a book then, I guess, 8 years later. It was because of these things that I started working, actually, one of the people who was in that Martin Luther King group, and I said, well, let's do something about this, and we started writing this book. The book really doesn't advise schools or teachers what they might do to solve these problems, and that's both its main point and a major drawback. It doesn't advise teachers in schools what they might do to make America a more equal place, because it doesn't think inequality in America fundamentally comes from the school system, although the school system does a very good job, I think, of justifying the inequalities that result elsewhere. So what was the main hope that I had as a kid? When I was growing up in a small town, my mom was a member of the school committee. It was a town like towns around here. We had town meetings, very democratic. And I went to a small high school in Deep River, Connecticut. What was it that people thought was possible?